Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of this show. And every week I get to talk to interesting CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies. Check out my archives. Got some great episodes with the co-founders or CEOs from Netflix, YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable. I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And my guest today is Shirin. And Shirin, how do you pronounce your last name?
Oreizy.
Oreizy, Shirin Oreizy. She's the founder and CEO of Next Step. It's an award-winning behavioral marketing agency. They have offices in San Francisco and Boston. She has a degree in engineering and computer science from UC Berkeley, holds accreditations from Duke University and UC Berkeley on behavioral science and positive psychology. Her work applying behavioral science in marketing is regularly featured in Forbes, Inc. and the Huffington Post. And she's also been on the board of Entrepreneurs Organization and a guest lecturer at Stanford as well. This episode is brought to you by Rise25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. If you have any questions or you're curious about podcasts, go contact us at Rise25 Media or email us at support@rise25media.com. All right, Shirin. So it's such a pleasure to have you on here. And I love to ask people first about how they first dip their toe in the water with entrepreneurship. You have had your company for about 17 years now, since 2004. But were you, like, as a kid out there starting businesses on the weekends? When did you get started with entrepreneurship?
Yeah, not so much. I have a very kind of traditional family dynamic where everybody's like, go get a good education and find a good job and then kind of try to climb the corporate ladder. And so my journey actually to entrepreneurship didn't start until later in my life. So I started off, did the good kid thing and went to college and studied engineering, and then took on a job as an electrical engineer working at NVIDIA, a large tech company, and did that for a number of years. And I realized that it was just not my genius zone. I wasn't really enjoying it. I don't like being stuck in a cubicle. and so I decided at that point that, if I don't continue to, change this trajectory, that, I'll probably, find myself near retirement and fairly unhappy. And so I point blank jumped ship, which I guess is a bit of an entrepreneur characteristic, you could say, without quite really having a plan in place. I'll share with you a fun story. At the time that I quit, I loved baking as a hobby. And I was like, I just want to completely change and start like a dessert cafe. And so I did a 2-week unpaid internship at a Michelin rated restaurant. And literally that was it. I was like, nope, can't do
Cured me of that.
Okay, now what?
Yeah. Like, that is no fun. That's literally, like, I think that's the premise of the book, The E-Myth, which is about a baker. Yeah. Not loving it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. So how do you go from electrical engineering to starting when you started it? So Next Step was it was a digital design agency, right?
Yep. Yeah. So I did a bit of soul searching after that little baking kind of experience and tried to really focus on, what are the elements that I like and where do I feel like is my zone of genius? And, back when I was at Berkeley, I competed in a couple of different business tool competitions around web usability, et cetera. And so I remember at that time, I had so much fun with it. And so that's kind of basically how I got started. I was like, okay, let me go into this. At the time, 2004, still fairly early days of web. And so we started off largely as a digital design agency, and we were doing that for a number of years until I met my husband. And then things changed a little bit.
How did they change when you met your husband?
So he was also a serial entrepreneur. And at the time, he was running a series of sleep medicine clinics nationwide. And they actually had really high adherence rate to these like really difficult sleep apnea treatment plans. I don't know if you've ever, like, you have to get a patient to like wear this big mask, overnight. Yeah. And they had like 80% adherence rate, the highest in the nation. I was like really fascinated. I'm like, how are you getting people to do that? And he shared the secret, which was behavioral science. And so he basically found all the books he could get on behavioral science, like Cialdini's book and whatnot. And he was very systematically applying it inside their clinics. And as a result, we're seeing there's a big change. And so that kind of got me onto my quest of really trying to learn about behavioral science and, taking coursework and whatnot. And what I quickly recognized is that there's currently a lot of really great research around how people make decisions happening in academia, Duke, Harvard, et cetera. And it's not as common actually in the private sector. So government agencies, et cetera, do have behavioral science teams. I know Obama started one, but it's less common in the private sector. But increasingly, we're seeing a lot more adoption. So the Ubers of the world, Airbnbs, Walmart, et cetera, Google, Facebook, they all now have behavioral science teams in-house. And I was much more passionate about figuring out how could we bring this work to our clients. And our clients tend to be smaller companies, so they're more like mid-market, et cetera. And so a couple of years later, we started finding ways to, incorporate behavioral science into our work. And we've been doing it for a number of years now. And
I realize we should probably take a step backwards for those of us who don't know what behavioral science is and kind of define it. So, talk to me like I'm a 3-year-old or sure. Maybe a little older than that. How about an 8-year-old? An 8-year-old.
And a really intelligent 8th grader.
A precocious 3-year-old. Yeah.
So behavioral science, we like to say, is the study of how people really make decisions. And we emphasize that word really because you have another field of study called economics that everyone's familiar with. And I think contrasting behavioral science or behavioral economics to economics is really important because in economic theory, we assume that the humans that we're dealing with are always rational. So we just assume if I give you more information or more choices, you're a really rational person, you're going to make the right choice. Right. And as behavioral scientists or behavioral economists, and I'm using these terms interchangeably, it's the same thing. We see the world a little bit differently. We actually recognize that, hey, yeah, people can be rational, but a lot of times they're irrational. A lot of times their emotions, their environment, whether a physical or digital environment, social factors, et cetera, influence how they make decisions. And so we're much more interested around understanding those factors because, if you look at it, 80% of your decision making is actually much more motivated by that. And then you kind of post-rationalize your decisions with the facts and figures. So
interesting.
A little intro to behavioral science.
Now, like anything, there's a good side and a bad side, and good things can be put to bad use, right? So I think probably a lot of people listening to this might think, oh, that could be they could be manipulating people. Yep. How do you bring those considerations to the work that you do? Or is it something you just kind of set aside and you say, I represent my client's interests?
So we're actually pretty particular about the types of clients we work with. So we're intentional around the industries that we work with to make sure that these, nudges that we're doing are impacting people for the better. So we work with a lot of financial technology companies really trying to help people save more, out of debt, et cetera. And then we work with like what I would consider more neutral, like B2B technology companies. So we tend to shy away from certain industries that we believe we're not as aligned with their mission.
Got it. So give me some case studies then. You mentioned fintech, or it could be from a different industry of, client comes to you with some particular challenge. They're like, a sleep apnea center and they can't get their people to put the big machine on their face. So some other example of your own.
Yeah, absolutely. So our expertise in behavioral science is very much focused on helping clients with their marketing and growth. So that's kind of our sweet spot. So an example of it would be one of our clients, Ariely. They're actually based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they're a startup, and they basically are trying to displace traditional realtors. So in a traditional realtor model, they come in and charge you 3% to buy or sell your home. With Ariely, they bring in a lot of technology and automation, et cetera, and as a result can help save you about 2% on that transaction. So they charge like 1.5%. And the challenge that they came to us with was, how do we frame this benefit, this savings, to basically motivate more people to want to adopt this new technology solution, because it's something that's unfamiliar. People are much more familiar with the traditional realtor. And so when we looked at it, and especially in the context of the Bay Area that I know you're familiar with, home prices are insane. And so that 2% cost saving can be as much as $20,000 on an average home. And one thing we know is that as humans, because we actually don't deal with $20,000 transactions every day, it's really hard for us to kind of conceptualize it. So the traditional economic way of framing the benefit would be, tell people you save $20,000, you're done. And our worldview is like, no, that's not going to work. So we used a behavioral science concept, which is called framing. And the idea of framing is that people's preferences change based on how you frame a solution. So a simple example of that is, if you walk into the grocery store, you see 2 pints of frozen yogurt. One says 20% fat, and the other says 80% fat free. You're going to grab 80% fat free. To the economist, that makes no sense. Those two things are exactly the same. That just showcases how I can, in marketing, frame something differently and then change your preference. So we used that concept, and we knew that we had to change this frame of that $20,000 saving. And so what we ended up doing is we iterated a bit, and we thought, okay, how do we make this feel like a hedonic reframe, like something that you can get a benefit from right now? Can we tell people, hey, you can use money to go on a big fancy vacation? Or can we tell people you can actually use something that's more relevant to the home, which is like remodel your kitchen? And once we did that, we saw this nice big lift in terms of the conversion metrics, and the cost per downloads like radically reduced. They were getting a lot more quality leads when they framed it to, hey, you can remodel your kitchen. And then we were like, okay, so this concept is working. Let's keep iterating on it. And then our next pass was, if you use Ariely, you can pay off your mortgage 3 years earlier. And that was, even better as a frame. So that's an example of using this insight of framing to rethink how you're, positioning your company or a benefit to get more people to want to use it.
Yeah. Now I know research is important in the work that you do. Do you do research as a company? And if you do, how do you work that into the business model of what you do? I know you said you work with startups and smaller companies. How does research play in?
Yeah, great question. So think of it this way. Behavioral science gives us this kind of library of like 300 different principles about how people make decisions. But we need to figure out which one's going to be applicable for your situation. And so we've actually developed a proprietary research methodology. We call it the science of design. And it has a couple core components to it. But the idea is that we first come in and do just a behavioral science assessment of how is it that you're currently communicating to your audience. So we look at your website, your landing pages, if you're a B2B company, your sales presentations, and if you have social ads, et cetera. And largely what we're trying to do here is understand where are the gaps from what we know about how people make decisions and what you have. And that gives us a bunch of best practices and things to do. And then typically, based on the challenge that we're trying to solve, we then add on a layer of what we call qualitative research, which is basically go out there and talk to people. And so we interview people and we use a lot of behavioral science to kind of de-bias those conversations. So we're not, getting confirmation bias and, giving you something you think you want to hear. And largely what we're trying to understand there is like, okay, what's the context of decision-making? How are people talking about their pain points and challenges? And once we have that insight, we then kind of come up with the different hypotheses. So from that library of 300 principles, we come back and say like, okay, we've looked at how you communicate. We've talked to, a bunch of your users and clients. Here are 3 or 4 principles that we think might be at play for how to better motivate your audience. And so we then take it into quantitative research, which is seeing if that concept works at scale. So imagine if you're a B2B company, we go find your target audience on LinkedIn and we serve them up different ads with these different behavioral science principles. If you're B2C, we might serve up ads on social media or email, et cetera. And then we're measuring, which principle is working better. And the idea here is that now it's at scale, it's, thousands of people. And so you have very statistically significant results and we can feel very confident. So that really example that I mentioned, it was run on social and, thousands of people. So we feel very confident that like, hey, this finding is true and you can leverage it and so forth. And then once we have that finding, what makes us a little bit unique is because we were born out of that digital design agency, we have a whole creative team. So we then take that insight and then infuse it into designing your website, your landing pages, your sign up flow, et cetera. So we really kind of take that full life cycle of making sure we take insights around how people are making decisions and then make sure that it, is put into your creative and how you're talking to your audience.
Now, I want to ask about, from a business perspective, what it was like for you to pivot and change the focus of the business from a digital design agency to you falling in love with this behavioral science as an idea, but then you have to apply it to your own business and figure out how you can sell it. And probably you're selling something kind of novel and new and different. So what was it like especially in the early days of making those changes to the business?
Yeah, it was pretty tough. It took some time. So I think in the very early days, we didn't have the full-blown research methodology. We basically were saying, hey, right now you're doing your digital design and just kind of you're hiring folks and they're kind of doing whatever, they think is best. And we'll bring in some behavioral science best practices. So, we'll design your, say, website or whatnot using the best practices. And then over time, we evolved to see, okay, we can have a more robust methodology where we can bring in these research components of qual and quantitative research. And then our next kind of iteration on it was, let's focus on a customer segment that we think we can be most successful with. So instead of like this broad array of types of companies that we can help with, what are the characteristics of companies where we can, deliver these insights, very effectively. And so we noticed this trend with our startup clients that because they're typically under the gun to deliver metrics and growth metrics and data-driven and show to their board why they need their next round of funding. They typically, in the earlier stages when they're kind of series A, B, C, might not have a lot of this, either research framework in place or staff in place, et cetera. So we started noticing that there's this a lot more value that these clients are getting from this work. And that's, where we've been focused. So we primarily do a lot of work with startups in the kind of series A to C range. We do a lot of work with fintech clients, with B2B tech clients, and a couple of different other industries as well. So,
and getting back to the question I asked earlier about where you draw the line between whether this is work we want to support or not. Can you think of a time when you had a client come to you where you're like, we can't do this?
Okay. I'm trying to think. I'm not going to name the companies.
No, that's fine. But I'm more curious about what they did and why it caused you to draw the line.
Yeah. So they, one of these companies that approached is a pretty bigger, well-known company, but they did vaping products, and they were trying to get a younger demographic of people in their teens and early 20s to adopt vaping, and we were just concerned around the health aspect of that.
Yeah.
So we just it wasn't an area of interest. Or we've been approached with companies that like have food products that are not necessarily healthy for people to consume much. So something like that is,
yeah.
And generally speaking, in those scenarios, we're pretty honest. We're like, hey, we just believe that we want to, do this work for industries that we have an alignment as far as mission. And I should add that we also have a social impact side to what we do, which is a fun part. So we do a lot of in-kind work and things for mission-driven companies and organizations that are trying to end homelessness or land conservation, things of that nature, ending sex trafficking and so forth. So there's a side of our business where we, try to support social impact organizations.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm gonna have to ask you about that afterwards because we've been doing something similar as well. So yeah, trying to build the same thing. Well, what about, there's been in Silicon Valley, there's been increased awareness. There's been movies like the Social Dilemma that come out that talk increasingly about, kind of digital addiction and these platforms that are trying to get our eyeballs. So it's kind of create, in a sense, a gray area or kind of increased awareness to the negative or the side effects that can come from the increasingly online world that we live in. Mm-hmm. Any of that, has that ever come into any of the work that you do, or has that ever been a concern, or has there ever been, kind of more gray area type of scenarios where someone's approached you and you'd be like, hey, we just don't feel comfortable doing this type of work?
Not so much. I mean, there's definitely been times where we've been approached by industries that are clearly not our segment. We rarely work with those type of companies, but I actually, I do know friends in the space that have worked, done research projects around helping stop misinformation, and like TikTok, et cetera. And there've been behavioral science teams that have, we can't stop TikTok, but let's help stop, misinformation, et cetera. Right. We haven't personally done any projects at our agency in those realms, but I'm aware of.
Let's talk about the culture inside your company, because I know you've also incorporated behavioral science and positive psychology work into building your team culture. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the culture is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I think it was largely because I personally, when I was in tech, I didn't feel like working at a very large company. There was elements of the culture that I thought were missing. And so based on the coursework that I've done on positive psychology, which is largely understanding, how do you take people that are largely fine and happy and make them happier and more satisfied with their life and their career, et cetera. And then also what we know from behavioral science around how do you get people to adopt better behaviors and so forth around, their financial well-being, around their health, et cetera. So we've designed several different components to our culture to really help our team, I'd say, hopefully manifest the best version of themselves, both personally, what's important to them in terms of their life and also professionally. And so we use a lot of accountability systems. So we typically, at the start of each year, we do vision boarding exercises where people start manifesting what they want to create for the year in terms of what's important to them. And we also do like things like dream assignment, where we have people really think about where they want to be in their career 3 to 5 years from now out, and then how can we support them in achieving that dream state. And we finally bring in tons of peer accountability, because if there's one thing we know from behavioral science, is that it's one thing to think of something and it's a whole different thing to actually do that behavior. And so we have Slack boards where people share photos of what they're doing and their exercise habits. We meet quarterly, monthly to go through our vision boards, et cetera. When COVID hit, we were obviously, very worried for the financial well-being of our team. And so we did a whole quarter where we helped everybody hands-on learn more about their, just understanding their finances and how they can, go to the different stages of like financial well-being, starting off from, getting out of debt to obviously thriving. And so we try to do our best to manifest some of this stuff in our culture too.
That's cool. We're running a little short on time, but I do want to ask you, I know, we met through Entrepreneurs Organization. You've participated in different entrepreneurial groups. I'm not familiar with Conscious Leadership Group, which is one you participate in now. What is that? And what role has it played in your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined Conscious Leadership Group, or shorthand CLG, about 2 years ago. And I have to say, it's been one of the best decisions, I'd probably say top 5 to 10 best decisions of my life, and not just as an entrepreneur, but overall. And largely the concept of CLG, or Conscious Leadership Group, is how can you live a much more conscious life by learning about, what's causing situations to not work in your favor, and what are some of the, different commitments. So we have like 15 commitments that are really trying to help us assess how we as leaders show up in our businesses. How do we show up in terms of grappling with our, teams, or executive teams, or the clients, et cetera, and really trying to understand the story that we bring ourselves and how that's serving or not serving us. So it's been a phenomenal group, and it's really helped me uncover a lot of my own personal patterns of how I don't always manifest the best things, and how I can kind of rethink that. So I think it'd be great for folks to check it out. It's called Conscious Leadership Group. I know that they're setting up forums coming up for the fall, I believe, and they're based in just largely nationwide. So.
Excellent. All right. Last question. I'm a big fan of gratitude. So if you look around at your peers and your contemporaries, others in your industry, or other peers and contemporaries in other behavioral science groups, in other companies, who do you respect? Who do you admire?
So I'd probably have to choose Dan Ariely. He's a really well-known behavioral scientist and a New York Times bestselling author, and obviously a professor. And what I like about him is that he literally has used behavioral science to bring behavioral science into the world and help make it much more accessible and less academic and much more easy for just regular laymen to understand the concepts. And he also has a bunch of different labs that they're really helping figure out how to apply this stuff to help people live better, healthier lives, more financially, help support the financial well-being of people, and so forth. So I think I'd probably go with that.
Yeah, Predictably Irrational, I think, is one of his books. Teaches at Duke, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent selection. All right, Shirin, it's such a pleasure having you. Where can people go to learn more about you, connect with you, ask you additional questions if they have them?
Absolutely. So I offer 2 places. One is our website, which is hellonextstep.com. So hellonextstep.com. You can learn more about our work, and we have tons of free resources. We just launched our Science of Design webinar series. So you can find that there. And then obviously LinkedIn, just feel free to find my name and let me know that you heard about me through Rise 25. And I'd love to connect with you.
Awesome, Shirin. Thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.